Fame creates distance. Distance creates silence. And silence allows monsters to hide in plain sight. Behind platinum records and sold-out arenas live private wars no audience ever saw. This is not a story about rival gangs or obsessed fans. This is about betrayal at the deepest level possible. Parents, spouses, caretakers, the people trusted with keys to the house. These are 12 legendary musicians whose lives were ended by their own family. Number 12, Marvin Gaye. Marvin Gaye was not simply a singer, he was a moral compass, a man whose voice carried empathy into living rooms during an era defined by war division and unrest. What's Going On did not ask a question for effect. It asked it because Marvin was genuinely searching for peace in a world that had given him none. To the public, he was successful, wealthy, and revered. Yet to his family, he was still a target. At the center of Marvin's suffering stood his father, Marvin Gaye Sr., a man who presented himself as a preacher, yet ruled his household through terror. From childhood, Marvin was beaten, humiliated, and psychologically dismantled. His father despised weakness, despised sensitivity, and most of all despised the fact that his son possessed a gift that brought love instead of fear. As Marvin's career flourished, the abuse did not stop. It evolved. Success became fuel for resentment. Marvin attempted distance. He added the letter E to his name to separate himself from the man who had inflicted decades of trauma. But emotional separation is not physical safety. And by the early 1980s, Marvin was collapsing under addiction paranoia and untreated depression. Despite being one of the most successful artists in the world, he returned to his parents' Los Angeles home to help care for his mother after surgery. It was a decision rooted in loyalty. It became fatal. The house was a battlefield. Arguments were constant. His father screamed at his mother relentlessly. Marvin intervened repeatedly. The rage was mutual, the history too deep, and the danger invisible to outsiders. Months before his death, Marvin bought his father a Christmas gift, a .38 caliber revolver. He believed he was protecting his family. Instead, he armed his executioner. On April 1, 1984, a petty argument over missing insurance paperwork escalated. Marvin shouted at his father to stop abusing his mother. He confronted him physically. His mother separated them. Marvin returned to his bedroom believing the storm had passed. It hadn't. Marvin Gaye Sr. walked down the hallway silently, entered his son's room, raised the revolver, and fired into Marvin's chest, then stepped closer and fired again at point-blank range. Execution, not impulse, not panic. Marvin died the next day, one day before his 45th birthday. His father served no prison time. The man who sang "Mercy, Mercy" me received none from the man who gave him life. Number 11. Selena Quintanilla. Selena Quintanilla was not approaching superstardom. She was already there. At 23, she had conquered Tejano. Music shattered cultural barriers and completed the album that would carry her into global fame. She was joy embodied, work ethic incarnate, a young woman surrounded by family and protected by trust. And that trust became her vulnerability. Yolanda Saldívar entered Selena's life as a fan, persistent, devoted, harmless. She positioned herself as indispensable, fan club president, boutique manager, gatekeeper, confidant. Selena treated her not as an employee, but as family. She called her mom. Yolanda gained access to money schedules and absolute proximity. Behind the loyalty was theft. By early 1995, fans complained of missing merchandise. Financial records didn't add up. Selena's father confronted Yolanda with proof of embezzlement. She was fired and threatened with legal action. For most people, this would have ended the relationship. For Yolanda, it erased her identity. Without Selena, she was nothing. Yolanda manipulated sympathy, fabricated stories, and stalled returning documents. Selena agreed to meet her privately at a motel to retrieve tax records. It was compassion. It was fatal. Inside room 158, the lies collapsed. Selena demanded the paperwork. Yolanda stalled. When Selena turned to leave, Yolanda drew a revolver and fired into her back. The bullet severed an artery near her heart. Selena did not die instantly. She ran. Bleeding profusely, she ran nearly 400 feet to the motel lobby, leaving a trail of blood. Yolanda did not help, did not call for aid. She chased her screaming. Selena collapsed and with her final breath named her killer. Yolanda barricaded herself in a truck for 10 hours, turning the moment into spectacle. Claiming accident, claiming victimhood. The trial dismantled those lies. Selena's dying declaration sealed the verdict. Life in prison. Selena died not because she trusted the wrong stranger. She died because she treated obsession like family. Number 10. William Weegi Howard. William Weegi Howard was the voice of heartbreak for an entire generation. As the lead singer of the Dramatics, he didn't just perform soul music, he embodied it. In the Rain wasn't a song people listened to, it was a song people lived inside. His voice carried pain, tenderness, and dignity in equal measure. He toured the world, sold millions of records, and became part of the emotional fabric of 1970s R&B. By the year 2000, his fame had dimmed, but his legacy had not. He was still respected, still working, still loved. What ultimately killed him had nothing to do with the music industry. It happened inside his own living room. Now by 2000, Howard was 49 years old, living in Detroit with his wife and her 19-year-old son, Cooke Walker. This wasn't a stranger or a distant relative. This was his stepson, a young man he had helped raise, a member of the household. Like many blended families, the dynamic was tense. Authority clashed with adolescence. Respect was contested, but nothing about the situation suggested murder until February 22nd. That afternoon, Howard was at home trying to relax. In another room, his stepson was playing music at full volume, loud enough to shake the house. Howard asked him to turn it down. It was not a confrontation. It was a routine request, the kind that happens in homes every day. Cooke refused. The argument escalated rapidly. Voices rose. The disagreement stopped being about music and became about control, pride, and power. Then the line was crossed. Cooke Walker retrieved a gun. In a moment that lasted seconds and destroyed multiple lives, he fired. The bullet struck William Howard in the chest. The man who sang about emotional devastation now lay dying in his own home because a teenager didn't want to turn the volume down. Howard was rushed to the hospital, but the damage was catastrophic. He died shortly after arrival. The Dramatics lost their voice. Soul music lost one of its quiet giants. And a family was permanently shattered. Cooke Walker was arrested and charged. The case was straightforward. No mystery, no conspiracy, no self-defense. The jury convicted him of second-degree murder and a firearms offense. He was sentenced to 25 to 50 years in prison. A career spanning decades ended over a stereo dial. This case remains one of the most chilling examples of domestic violence because of its sheer banality. There was no grand motive, no long-standing feud, just unchecked anger and access to a weapon. It forces an uncomfortable truth into the light. Sometimes fame doesn't end in tragedy because of excess or enemies. Sometimes it ends because the living room is more dangerous than the street. Number 9. Al Jackson Jr. Al Jackson Jr. was called the human timekeeper. If you've ever moved to a soul record from the 1960s or 70s, you were likely following his beat. As the drummer for Booker T and the MGs, he didn't just keep rhythm, he defined it. He was the backbone of Stax Records, the pulse behind Otis Redding, Al Green, Wilson Pickett, and countless others. His drumming was disciplined, restrained, and impossibly precise. He was respected, wealthy, and at the top of his craft. At home, his life was unraveling. Al Jackson Jr.'s marriage to Barbara Jackson was volatile long before it turned deadly. Friends described it as toxic, fueled by jealousy, control, and explosive arguments. By 1975, Al had decided to leave. He planned to file for divorce, and it was a dangerous decision. Months earlier, during a violent domestic argument, Barbara shot him in the chest. Al survived, miraculously, and inexplicably, he chose not to press charges. Whether out of fear, loyalty, or denial, he stayed. That decision sealed his fate. On October 1st, 1975, Al returned home after attending a boxing match screening. According to Barbara's account, she ran to him claiming intruders were in the house. 8 moments later, armed men appeared. Al was beaten, forced to the ground, and shot 5 times in the back. Execution style. Barbara was found tied up but unharmed. The police immediately questioned the narrative. Nothing of value appeared to be stolen. The violence was personal, targeted, and devastatingly familiar. Investigators suspected the same woman who had shot Al months earlier had hired the killers to finish the job. The suspected gunman had connections to Barbara. The motive was clear. Divorce meant loss of control, money, and status. If she couldn't have him, no one would. But suspicion is not proof. Despite widespread belief within the music community, the case never reached a conviction. The evidence was circumstantial. Witnesses were unreliable. The justice system failed. Al Jackson Jr.'s murder remains officially unsolved. Barbara Jackson died years later without ever facing trial. Al Jackson Jr.'s legacy lives on in grooves that still feel alive, but his death stands as a warning. Violence ignored does not disappear, it escalates. And sometimes the most dangerous rhythm is the one playing inside your own home. Number 8. Peter Tosh. Peter Tosh was not just a musician, he was a warning, a revolutionary voice who carried defiance in every lyric and conviction in every breath. As a founding member of the Wailers, he stood shoulder to shoulder with Bob Marley. But Tosh was sharper, angrier, less forgiving. He didn't soften his message for radio or governments. He preached equal rights, justice, and resistance with the posture of a man who feared nothing. What he underestimated was betrayal. Peter Tosh believed deeply in helping the downtrodden. He opened his home, his wallet, and his inner circle to people who had nowhere else to go. Among them was Dennis Lepa-Lobin, a former prisoner recently released with no money, no stability, and no future. Tosh gave him food, gave him shelter, gave him dignity. He treated him like family. Lobin did not see compassion, he saw entitlement. As Tosh's success continued, Lobin's resentment grew. He believed Tosh owed him money, believed proximity to fame meant access to wealth. Friends warned Tosh. They sensed danger. Tosh ignored them. He believed loyalty could be taught. On September 11, 1987, that belief collapsed in blood. That night, Tosh was at home in Kingston with friends including DJ Jeff Dixon and his partner Marlene Brown. Lobin arrived with two armed accomplices. They demanded money, American dollars, and Tosh calmly explained he kept no cash at home. The men did not believe him. What followed was hours of torture. Tosh was pistol-whipped, beaten, and humiliated in his own living room. Still, he refused to lie. Still, he refused to produce money that did not exist. At some point, the robbery transformed into punishment. Lobin realized there would be no payoff. Only rage remained. He shot Peter Tosh twice in the head, then opened fire on everyone else. Jeff Dixon was killed. Marlene Brown was shot in the head but survived by pretending to be dead. Others were wounded. The men fled, leaving devastation behind. Peter Tosh died at 42 years old, not from political assassination, not from industry enemies, but from a man he had fed, protected, and treated like family. Lobin was arrested, convicted, and sentenced to death. The sentence was later commuted to life imprisonment. He remains incarcerated. This murder forces a brutal question. Where is the line between generosity and self-destruction? Tosh's kindness was not weakness, but it gave a violent man access. Sometimes the people we save decide we owe them our lives. Number 7. Brian Jones. Brian Jones was the soul of the Rolling Stones before the Rolling Stones knew who they were. He named the band, defined its sound, played nearly every instrument imaginable. He was the golden boy of the British invasion. Fashion-forward, unpredictable, and brilliant. By 1969, he was isolated. Fired from the band he created, Brian retreated to Cotchford Farm, a sprawling estate meant to be sanctuary. Instead, it became a pressure chamber. Drugs, alcohol, depression, and resentment filled the house. Brian surrounded himself with hangers-on and employees who blurred the line between staff and family. Among them was builder Frank Thorogood. Thorogood was hired to renovate the property but soon moved in. He became a live-in companion, caretaker, and fixer. But resentment brewed. Brian treated him poorly. Thorogood felt exploited, underpaid, and humiliated. The tension was constant. Money arguments frequent. Alcohol abundant. On July 2, 1969, Brian went for a midnight swim in his pool during a heat wave. Witnesses later stated he was coherent and optimistic. Thorogood joined him. Others went inside. Minutes later, Brian Jones was found at the bottom of the pool. The death was ruled misadventure. Drugs and alcohol blamed. Case closed. But the story never settled. Years later, multiple witnesses, including the Stones' road manager, reported a deathbed confession. Frank Thorogood allegedly admitted he snapped during an argument over money and held Brian's head underwater until he stopped struggling. Thorogood died in 1993. The confession emerged after his death. Police reviewed the case decades later, but no charges were filed. Brian Jones became a member of the 27 Club. But this was not an overdose, not self-destruction. It was domestic betrayal, a man living under his roof, eating his food, taking his money. Brian Jones didn't burn out. He was drowned by someone he trusted like family. Number 6. Felix Papalardi. Felix Papalardi was a quiet architect of hard rock. He wasn't the loudest man on stage, but his influence thundered through the music. As producer of Cream, he helped shape the sound that would define late 60s rock. As bassist and vocalist for Mountain, he gave the world Mississippi Queen, a song that still roars from classic rock speakers decades later. Classically trained, brilliant, and meticulous Felix understood music at a structural level few ever reached. What he failed to understand was the danger sleeping beside him. Felix's wife, Gail Collins, was not a passive bystander in his career. She was deeply embedded. She wrote lyrics for Cream, designed album artwork, managed business affairs. Their relationship was not just romantic, it was professional, creative, and financial. From the outside, they looked like a power couple. Inside their Manhattan apartment, controlled jealousy and volatility ruled everything. His friends described Gail as possessive and intensely controlling. Their marriage was an open arrangement fueled by drugs, ego, and insecurity. By the early 1980s, Felix had reached a breaking point. He had fallen in love with another woman and planned to leave Gail. For Gail Collins, this was not abandonment. It was annihilation. In a grim parallel to other cases, Felix had purchased a firearm for his wife months earlier. A small silver derringer meant for protection. It became the instrument of his death. On April 17, 1983, the arguments escalated into their final confrontation. Inside their apartment, Gail retrieved the gun. According to forensic evidence, she did not fire by accident. She aimed at Felix's neck. The bullet severed his carotid artery. He collapsed and bled to death on the bedroom floor. He was 43 years old. Gail called police claiming the gun went off accidentally while Felix was showing her how to use it. The physical evidence contradicted her story. The angle of the shot, the marital tension, Felix's intent to leave. Prosecutors charged her with second-degree murder. The jury did not convict her of murder. Instead, she was found guilty of criminally negligent homicide, a lesser charge. She served less than 2 years in prison before being released on parole. Felix Papalardi never got justice. Gail vanished from public life, living in isolation for decades. She died in Mexico in 2013, taking the truth with her. Felix's bass lines still shake walls, but his death remains a warning. Creative partnerships do not excuse violence, and gifts given in love can become weapons of control. Our number 5, Judith Barsi. Judith Barsi was a voice before she was a face. If you grew up in the 1980s, you heard her before you ever knew her name. She was Ducky in The Land Before Time. She was Anne Marie in All Dogs Go to Heaven. Her voice carried innocence, optimism, and musical warmth that defined childhood for millions. Behind the microphone, her life was terror. Judith's father, Joseph Barsi, was a violent, paranoid alcoholic who ruled the household through fear. He was threatened by his daughter's success, threatened by the possibility that she and her mother might leave him. Judith earned more money than he ever had. That fact enraged him. Joseph routinely threatened to kill her. He held knives to her throat, forced her to repeat rules late at night. She developed severe anxiety, pulling out her own hair and eyelashes. These were not hidden signs. They were visible screams for help. Judith's mother, Maria, sought help from Child Protective Services. Investigations were opened, warnings documented, then closed. The system failed. Maria planned an escape, quietly renting another apartment and moving belongings slowly. She feared Joseph would kill them if he suspected. He did. On July 25, 1988, Joseph entered Judith's bedroom while she slept and shot her in the head. He then murdered Maria, lived in the house with their bodies for 2 days, set the house on fire, and killed himself. Judith was 10 years old. The entertainment industry was devastated. Directors said Judith was Ducky. Her voice defined the character. Songs recorded after her death were dedicated to her memory. However, her tombstone reads, "Yep, yep, yep." Judith Barsi did not die because of fame. She died because the systems designed to protect children failed repeatedly and catastrophically. Her story remains one of the darkest reminders that talent does not shield children from abuse, and that ignoring warning signs costs lives. Number 4, Lee Morgan. Lee Morgan was a prodigy, a trumpet virtuoso whose talent arrived so early it barely gave him time to be young. By his late teens, he was already playing with jazz royalty. By his early 20s, he had helped define the hard bop sound that dominated the 1960s. Albums like The Sidewinder didn't just succeed, they reshaped the genre. Lee was cool, effortless, and fearless on stage, a musician whose confidence came from pure mastery. Off stage, his life unraveled. By the late 1960s, Lee Morgan was drowning in heroin addiction. The fame evaporated. The gigs disappeared. He sold his trumpet for drug money and slept on the streets of New York. Jazz history nearly lost him entirely. What saved him was not the industry. It was a woman named Helen Moore. Helen was not a musician. She was a street-smart woman who took Lee in when no one else would. She fed him, sheltered him, nursed him through violent withdrawal, and helped him reclaim his career. She became his manager, his protector, and his partner in everything but marriage. Without Helen Moore, there is no Lee Morgan comeback. And there was a comeback. Lee got clean. He returned to recording, touring, and acclaim. The jazz world welcomed him back as a resurrected genius. But success revived something darker as well: ego. As Lee regained status, he began to resent the woman who had seen him at his weakest. He started seeing a younger woman openly humiliating Helen. The power dynamic shifted, and the gratitude vanished. On February 19, 1972, Lee was performing at Slug's Saloon in New York City during a blizzard so severe ambulances struggled to move. Helen came to the club. An argument erupted. Witnesses say Lee physically threw her out, humiliating her in front of everyone. He told her never to return. She didn't leave. Helen sat in her car in the freezing storm. Then she made a decision. She returned to the club with a gun, walked up to Lee as he stood at the bar preparing for the next set, and shot him in the chest. The wound was serious but possibly survivable. Because of the blizzard, the ambulance was delayed. For over an hour, Lee Morgan lay bleeding on the floor of the club while Helen screamed apologies, realizing what she had done. By the time help arrived, he was dead. He was 33 years old. Helen was arrested. She was eventually deemed mentally unfit and served a short sentence. Lee Morgan was not killed by a stranger. He was killed by the woman who saved his life. Dependency, gratitude, resentment, and abandonment collided in a single irreversible moment. The question remains chilling. Was it jealousy, or was it erasure? When the person who rebuilds your life is discarded, what happens to them? Number 3. Slim Dunkin. In hip-hop, the word family often extends beyond blood. Crews, labels, and collectives become brotherhoods. Slim Dunkin was family to Atlanta rap. And born Mario Hamilton, he was a towering presence, physically and culturally. At 6'8", he was impossible to miss. As a core member of Brick Squad Monopoly, he stood beside Gucci Mane and Waka Flocka Flame during the movement's rise. He wasn't just muscle or entourage. He was trusted, respected, loved. That trust cost him his life. On December 16, 2011, Slim was at an Atlanta recording studio preparing to shoot a music video. The atmosphere was casual, familiar. People laughed, argued, and killed time the way families do. Among them was Vincent Young Vito Hardion. Not a stranger, not an outsider, a known affiliate, someone from inside the circle. The argument that erupted was absurdly small. Accounts vary: dice, a piece of candy, a Jolly Rancher. Something trivial ignited something lethal. Words escalated. Then fists. Slim overpowered Vito easily. In another environment, that would have been the end of it. It wasn't. Vito left the room, retrieved a gun, and returned. He fired one shot into Slim Dunkin's chest. The bullet pierced vital organs. Slim collapsed. Chaos followed. Vito fled. Slim was rushed to the hospital and pronounced dead. He was 24 years old. The studio was not robbed. There was no gang war, no external threat, just wounded pride and access to a firearm. Vito turned himself in days later, claiming self-defense. The jury rejected murder but convicted him of aggravated assault and firearms charges. He was sentenced to 25 years. Slim Dunkin didn't die because of industry rivalry. He died because the people around him were armed and unwilling to walk away. His death fractured Brick Squad permanently. Waka Flocka Flame publicly grieved, spiraling into depression. The loss was not just personal, it was structural. The family collapsed. Slim Dunkin's story is modern, and that's what makes it terrifying. Fame didn't save him. Brotherhood didn't protect him. The studio didn't sanctify him. The most dangerous people are often already in the room. Number 2. Sam Cooke. Sam Cooke was the blueprint. Before soul music became an industry, he was the industry. His voice carried warmth, control, and elegance that crossed racial lines in a country violently opposed to that very idea. Sam Cooke was not only a singer, he was a businessman, a civil rights figure, and one of the first black artists to truly own his work. Songs like A Change Is Gonna Come weren't just prophetic, they were dangerous. Tosh in Danger followed him into a motel room in Los Angeles. On December 11, 1964, Sam Cooke checked into the Hacienda Motel with a young woman named Elisa Boyer. What happened next has been debated for decades because every version of the story contains fractures that refuse to align. According to Boyer, she fled the room with Cooke's clothes after he allegedly assaulted her. According to Cooke's family and friends, the account made no sense. Cooke was known for generosity, not violence, and he had no reason to chase a woman naked into a motel office. What is undisputed is this: Sam Cooke ended up inside the motel office, partially clothed, disoriented, and demanding his belongings. Inside that office was Bertha Franklin, the motel manager. Within minutes, she shot him once in the chest. Cooke staggered outside and collapsed. He was pronounced dead shortly after. The killing was ruled a justifiable homicide. The case was closed with shocking speed. No jury trial, no full inquest. Franklin claimed self-defense. The official narrative painted Cooke as aggressive, irrational, and out of control. But the physical evidence raised troubling questions. Cooke was shot at close range. He was unarmed. His injuries were inconsistent with a violent attacker, and witnesses reported hearing a woman screaming long before the gunshot. The most disturbing element was the aftermath. Franklin was never charged. Boyer later recanted parts of her story and was later convicted in an unrelated prostitution case, raising questions about her credibility. Cooke's family, including his widow Barbara, rejected the official version entirely. They believed he had been lured, robbed, and silenced, not by strangers, but by people operating inside a closed domestic space where trust and authority overlapped. Sam Cooke was not killed on a street corner. He was killed indoors, behind closed doors, by someone with immediate power over the situation, someone who controlled access, someone positioned as a caretaker of that space. Whether it was fear, prejudice, panic, or something darker, the result was the same. One of the most important voices in American music history was gone at 33. Sam Cooke didn't live to see the change he sang about, and the truth about his final moments remains buried beneath a ruling many still believe was designed to make the questions disappear. Number 1. Bobby Fuller. Bobby Fuller was on the verge of everything. At 22 years old, he had achieved what most musicians never do, a hit that defined a generation. I Fought the Law wasn't just a chart success, it became an anthem of rebellion. Bobby Fuller had the look, the sound, and the momentum to become one of the defining figures of American rock. Then he was found dead. On July 18, 1966, Bobby Fuller's body was discovered inside his car, parked outside his Los Angeles home. He had been beaten. He was covered in gasoline, and toxicology reports showed signs of poisoning. Despite this, authorities ruled his death a suicide. The ruling baffled almost everyone who knew him. Bobby Fuller had no history of depression, no suicide note, no explanation for how he could have beaten himself, poisoned himself, doused himself in gasoline, and then calmly positioned himself in his car. And the ruling ignored basic physical reality. But the case was closed anyway. To understand why, you have to understand Bobby Fuller's inner circle. By the time of his death, Fuller was entangled in a web of management, industry handlers, and shadowy associates tied to the Los Angeles music scene of the mid-60s. He had recently expressed fear for his safety. He told friends he was being followed. He spoke openly about wanting out of certain business arrangements. Some accounts link his anxiety to organized crime figures rumored to have influence over his label and management. Others point to personal disputes within his trusted circle, people who controlled his career, finances, and access. What makes this case fit the pattern of intimate betrayal is not a single-name killer, but the environment that surrounded him. Bobby Fuller did not die in a random act of violence. He died within steps of his home, in a space controlled by people who knew his routines, his fears, and his vulnerabilities. After his death, evidence vanished. Witnesses changed stories. The investigation stalled. The suicide ruling stood, despite mounting contradictions. For decades, journalists and musicians have questioned the official version. No serious reinvestigation has ever produced answers. Bobby Fuller's family rejected the suicide ruling. So did many in the music community. To them, the message was clear. Someone wanted Bobby Fuller silent, and the system chose convenience over truth. At 22, his voice was erased before it could mature. His career ended not in scandal or decline, but in a mystery sealed by authority. Bobby Fuller didn't fight the law. Only the law fought the truth and won. These 12 stories prove one unbearable truth. Fame does not protect you from domestic violence. Talent does not shield you from jealousy. And the people closest to you often have the most access to destroy you. If this series changed the way you see fame, family, or trust, leave your verdict in the comments. Share these stories so they are never buried. And remember, the most dangerous place for a legend is often home.